I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jen West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadowcasting. All right, so I'm really excited about today's podcast. I think we're going to talk about one of the most known about and yet paradoxically maybe least known about popular tools out on the internet, and that is Enneagram and MBTI, or your Myers-Briggs type indicator. And I am just so excited to dive into this today because for the longest time, you and I have been teasing about Enneagrams and MBTIs. We've thrown ours out in podcasts when we're relating it to certain topics. And maybe for our audience and our leadership or our viewership, they've seen memes about different MBTIs, or maybe they have an idea of what their Enneagram is. Maybe they've taken a test or 12, if you're like me, just really wanting to make sure that you're that type. And what we're going to explore today is, what do these systems actually tell us? Like, what do they mean? And when we dig into them, is there meaning behind the label? Is there depth that maybe a meme can't really access for these tools? And so I'm really excited to dig into it.
Same here. I mean, if our audience has listened to more than 2 of our podcasts, I think we speak about either our personal Enneagram type or Myers-Briggs types in every episode, even if it's offhand. My type 1, whatever.
Yeah.
And so we're always jumping into that. But here's our disclaimer for this podcast. We are not experts, and we have not dove in super deeply to each one of these. We actually have professionals that we go to get all of our content and all of our information on this. And we would like to share that with you guys as well. So when we talk about these things, we're on the same page. So our 2 main resources, first is for the MBTI, is Personality Hacker. And it's run by Joe Marquette and Antonia Dodge, and they are amazing. They've got classes. I mean, okay, now they don't pay us for this, but they give classes. They have a podcast that's amazing, and their website can lead you into personality if you haven't played with it. And they're my reference. Whenever I'm looking up a personality type that's not my own, that's where I go. And then for Enneagram, I'm a big fan of Beatrice Chestnut and Aranio Pius because they dive deep into Enneagram, and they know so much and they teach it so well. And their website is CP Enneagram. And so those are our 2 main personality experts, if you say. And that's how we go deep, is we jump into their content because it's like a lifetime work for those guys.
So I think a real great visual for me as we explore this today is that we're kind of like explorers, right? We're not saying that we're the experts on this. We're not saying that we've done any sort of certification or deep dive work into this outside of our own explorations for our own self-growth and tools. So while they go deep, this podcast is going to be sort of more of like a casual exploration, really exploring how these tools can show up, what they mean a little bit, how they could be useful and practical, and how we can tie this back to celebrating our own humanity and being more conscious of the way that we cast our shadows in our life.
Yeah, way to bring us back to being explorers, because that's what we are. We both dove in to learn more about ourselves and to take us to a different level and pair it up with the other tools we've shared with you, with roundtables and archetypes and all of that good stuff. And this is just another tool that helps us navigate who we are and how best to explore ourselves in this world. For people who don't know, I guess we should start with MBTI, our Myers-Briggs. And what is it? If you haven't gone to any website or dove in at all, what do we got? What's going on?
So for our audience that's listening, I went ahead and grabbed some definitions online about MBTI. And I think this one, which unironically is from Wikipedia, is really the best way to to think about this type of tool. And it's a self report questionnaire that makes it says pseudoscientific claims to categorize individuals into distinct psychological types or personality types. Now, Jen and I were talking about this before we started recording. MBTI, we don't use as a pseudoscience. We don't claim that there's any sort of scientific backing to this, or we don't use it for those purposes. Again, we're coming at this from a personality exploration. So this is simply just one tool of many to give you a dynamic, individualistic look into who you are and how you are built. So some things of a personality type might resonate with you while others might not. And it's just a way for you to begin to understand how you operate in the world. And we're going to dig a little bit more into sort of this over identification with types. But basically, it was a tool that was constructed during the World War II time by Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter, Isabella Briggs Myers. It was sort of inspired by Carl Jung's archetype work in his psychological types book. And it creates a system that assigns you binary values based on a questionnaire that you fill out, again, self reported, for each of four types of categories. And the categories are the following: you either have more of a introversion or extroversion, sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling, and then the last one would be judging or perceiving. And as you take the test, you are showing a tendency or a preference towards one of these words in each of the categories. So, for example, for the first one, you might show more of a preference towards introversion or extroversion based on the replies you give in this test. And whichever one predominantly shows up, you receive the letter for that category. So if you showed a preference more for introversion, you would receive an I. If you showed preference more for extroversion, you would receive an E. In my example, and for my MBTI, I am an ENTJ. So that means that I show preference towards extroversion, intuition, thinking, and judging. So, Jen, do you want to talk about maybe how your preferences show up and anything else you would like to add towards the explanation of the MBTI?
Yeah, sure. So we'll follow up on those four letter groupings that we have. And I first learned about this MBTI through a book called Understand Me, and it was by Kiersey and Bates. And they simplified things into four categories, and then each of the 16 types fit into those different four categories. And it just made it easier to understand. But when I find a tool useful, or I find that it does speak about who I am, then I dive in hard. And so I found Myers Briggs, and all of a sudden, if you were an S or an N, there was also this little letter next to it that was the E or the I. So it would say that you're sensing, but you're extroverted, or you're sensing, but you're introverted. And so it basically moved the introversion, extroversion into other functions. And I was blown away. This is what Personality Hacker dives into, and they do a very good job in organizing what these introversion, extroversion of these other types mean and how they work. I highly recommend diving into that. But basically, it's what we would call a cognitive stack. And so there's the highest level of your personality, which will either be introverted or extroverted, and it's your flow state. And so my main flow state is introverted. I'm an ISFP. So my main flow state, the very first letter in my stack, is an F, which is feeling, and it's introverted. And so it's just this interesting breakdown of these letters into a stack of the way your brain function and what you like to skip or what you like to focus on. And it helps you organize your life a little bit better. So me as a introverted feeler, I'm about identity and understanding where people are coming from and where I come from and what my values are. That's like my flow state. I'm great at that. My second function, I'm an S, I'm a sensor, and my sensing is extroverted. And so when I'm in sensing, I'm doing it out in the world. I'm looking at the world from that perspective. That function is all about being in the moment, seeing what's happening around me, making decisions in the moment and acting. So I'm very adaptable. And so those are my top two functions. And if I learn that those are my top two functions, then I can flow in the world and find happiness and joy through leading with those two functions. So, yeah, cognitive stack is very cool and it just adds to how we know ourselves. But most people only know from like the website of 16 personalities that I'm the four letters. And then it gives this whole generalization of who you are as a person.
Yeah, and so I really loved that deep dive into the cognitive stacks, the cognitive functions, because I think it shows that there is depth beyond just that kind of broad stroke description that you're talking about, like on 16 personalities. And I think it's worth noting that that is a criticism of this type of tool is that it it has been shown and been used as sort of this broad arching generalization of a certain subsect of population. And one of the criticisms you'll sometimes hear is you can't take 8 billion people and try to organize them into 16 categories. And that's not really what's happening. It's that these 16 categories show a lens into who you are as a person. And so while the cognitive stacks really start to coalesce and add depth to just these random assortment of letters, there is and I think what it's showing is that these aren't necessarily polarizations. They're not binaries. You're not just extroverted or introverted. You have a tendency, you have a, they're more like preferences. And so while certain situations you might have an energy flow state that's more extroverted, and in other situations one might be more introverted, it's more about kind of overall in your general life from day to day, where do you lean? Where do you find yourself gravitating towards? And so what ends up happening is these letters begin to build a path inward into who you are based on self-reflection rather than a box that becomes this generalized description that you read. And while the generalized description is a great introduction, it's just the start. And that's what we want to highlight here. This is just scratching the surface. There is a lot of depth. And that's why we like listening to the experts like at Personality Hackers, because that's how we, or at least for myself, begin to explore those things at that deeper level and take it into a way that becomes useful and practical.
They have a podcast for everything from going into each different letter and just expanding that out for each type so that you just get to know what that letter means and how it works in a personality, whether it's extroverted or introverted, or how to love yourself better as your type and digging in that way. They just have, you can't get enough content. It goes so deep down the rabbit hole. So if you're into that type of stuff, go check them out if you haven't already. Yeah, so let's bounce over to Enneagram real quick and see where we get with that. Enneagram is more of a mystical. So let me step back just for a second. What I love about putting together multiple personality tools is that one tool doesn't tell you everything about yourself. It gives you a piece of the puzzle. So for Myers-Briggs, it can give you the, ah, that's who I am. Yes, I have language to describe how I kind of move through the world. And that's the energy of that. It kind of works with how your brain looks at information and moves through the world. Enneagram gives you another lens of who you are. And this one's more of your core motivations. It's not about behavior necessarily, because different motivations can create the same behavior, but for different reasons. But Enneagram, where Myers Briggs makes you go, oh, that's me. I have a communication for how I act. Enneagram kind of makes you feel like, oh, yeah, that's me. Do we have to look at that? Let's not, because it's deeper and it's more reactive at first. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well.
No, this is great. And I think you're actually hitting on sort of a maybe question that our audience might be asking. Why have multiple tools? That's actually a really great thing to bring up at this point because you're right. Why not if you like your MBTI, why not just spend all your time exploring that? I mean, we just talked about a whole podcast that's devoted just to that exploration of that personality tool. And I think you're right. There's a wider lens that can happen, a wider understanding of yourself that can occur when you use multiple tools, especially tools from multiple disciplines. You're talking about MBTI, which has a psychological and sort of Jungian influence. And then you have Enneagram, which comes from backgrounds in Christian mysticism, a little bit of Sufism. And so there's these different approaches of why these tools were created and why there might be overlap, especially if you go online, you can see correlation charts of if I'm this MBTI, what Enneagrams am I most likely? You can see those things, but it to me that dilutes the purpose of these tools because it's about creating a unique view into who you are and how you uniquely present as Jen or as Dave or as whoever's listening. And so I really think that that is actually an awesome point to hit on. And I just felt it was worth reiterating to that. Now, what I will say though with the exploration of the Enneagram is that I think you really hit on it. It does dive more into motivation. And so what's unique about these types is that there's 9 of them and each type has what's called its own core fear and its own core motivation or I'm sorry, core desire. And the way that this works and what let me back up. When I was exploring Enneagram, I struggled with what my Enneagram was. I took a lot of tests and I got a lot of different results, which is why I was making the joke at the beginning about taking 12 tests. Sometimes you get these different results. It depends where your headspace is at. It depends what's happening around you, where your focus is. And so I was trying to debate between a couple. And one of the 2 types I was debating between was my type 1, which is where I settled eventually, and type 3. And one of the things that kept coming up as an overlap between these types was recognition of work. And when you look at oversimplification, you talk about type 1s and how they're rigid and rule followers and black and white thinking. And when you look at a type 3, they're often seen as the gold star achievers, the student that always wants to get the A plus because it looks good. But when you dig into it a little bit further, you find that type 1s and type 3s can both kind of want the spotlight for different reasons. A type 1 might want the spotlight because they're trying to follow their moralistic code and promote what's good, right, and just in their view. They have a strong inner moral compass. Whereas a type 3 would want recognition because they're focused on achievement. They want to be seen, they want to be heard. And so what happens is you can have similar behaviors, similar expressions of self, but the underlying core desire is different. And that's where I really fell in love with the Enneagram, was recognizing that, okay, you can take this broad, similar action, but your Enneagrams could be different. And it's because of those Enneagrams that are different that really creates that unique perspective.
I had a similar issue with Enneagram. I took several tests, and unlike you, where you came up with lots of different energies, I'd come up mostly with type 4. So it hit pretty closely. But I hated the definition of the type 4. I just didn't resonate with it at all. And I tended that other people would see me more as a type 7. So I went that way. They're like, you're always happy and go lucky and looking at the bright side of stuff. You're probably a 7. But here's the thing with Enneagram. Like I said, it sometimes feels icky because it's getting to your core motivations, which are often protective mechanisms. They're based on our fears and how we want to be seen and how we act in our world. As a type 4, the first thing that I just didn't resonate was envy. And that's the vice or the passion. So, to step back again, we're going to do that a lot in this podcast. Enneagram was based off of, like Dave said, Sufi and Christian tools, mysticism. And so it has passions, and it's the passions of anger, pride, deceit, envy, avarice, fear, gluttony, lust, and sloth. And who wants to look at that side of our personality, right? So mine was envy, and I didn't feel like I was envious, and I didn't feel like I was a drama queen, like I would put my emotions out and pout and whine. And so I had a hard time getting into the Enneagram. But I then found a deeper layer, which all of these tools have, of the three subtypes of personality. And when we got into the subtypes, I found myself. And there's a subtype of the type 4 that's counter. And so it's very stoic and it holds all of its emotions inside and doesn't put them out into the world. And then I started to recognize myself as a type 4. Getting into that, I still didn't recognize envy until I dug deeper. And it was comparison. They have something. Why don't I have that? Why can't I create that? Envy, envy. I started to see it everywhere. It was the worst. This tool really helps you uncover unconscious parts of your personality. And when you see them, it's not very comfortable. Yeah. So, audience, I pulled up a web page that shows all of the different pieces of the Enneagram tool, and I will link it in the show notes. I will attempt to. It's a huge URL, or I'll put it on. I'll just stick it on our Instagram page for you guys to look at.
Okay. Well, we're just keeping it simple. So I think that was a really great exploration of the Enneagram. And I really liked how you dissected that even if there's overlap between certain types, that it was really starting to dig into and exploring the types and willing to have self honesty that got you to where you realized you were that type 4. And this is a really big part of tools that are self-reported questionnaires, because the Enneagram and MBTI both kind of fall under that umbrella. Because in order to figure out your Enneagram, you take a self-reported test. In order to figure out your MBTI, you usually take a self-reported test. Now, here's the fun thing with the Enneagram, and one way that you can play with it is there's a website called the Enneagram Institute, and you can sign up for free emails that come to your inbox daily, and you can sign up for up to 2, and it'll give you a mini lesson for that type each day. And one of the ways that I personally learned how to explore my Enneagrams when I was in the muck trying to make sense of it is I would pick the 2 types I was debating between and get those daily emails and read the lessons and see what came up for me in that day. And that way I was looking at the type through the lens of the day I was in, rather than using the day I was in to pick the type that I am. And I think that's a really important nuance, because if we're having a really bad day and then we sit and try to take a test and figure out what type we are, all that crap is going to influence how you respond to your test. And it's true if you're in a really good mood too. If you're feeling really good and joyous and happy and maybe carefree, you're going to be a little more nonchalant in your response. And maybe you're not taking as hard a look at some of your answers, or maybe you're smoothing over how you might actually respond because you're in a good mood. What ended up happening is, as I went through these highs and lows of a normal life, and I began looking over weeks or months at a time of these 2 types, I began to see a much clearer picture of which type was really edging the other one out. And then I would rinse and repeat and kind of compare. And by doing this, I really started to build a picture for myself of okay, it's really hard to argue that I'm not a type 1 personality. And now when I share it with everyone around me, it's pretty self-evident, I would say. I'm very like structured and logical in my thinking, and that's how type 1s are. There's this That's kind of like that superficial top level, right? That broad stroke. But then as you start to dig into the type 1s and you start to look at the uncomfy stuff, like Jen was talking about, like the fixations or like anger or resentment that comes up with type 1s, those aren't really fun topics to talk about because they're hard, especially a type 1 whose whole moral drive is to be the good guy and to have the austerity of the right choice, of the moral choice. The last thing that guy wants to do is talk about being angry about something or to talk about how their boundaries were crossed or their moral compass was slighted and how that can slide into kind of this resentment territory. What ends up happening is, as uncomfortable as it gets, you start to really recognize that you can't deny what's right there in front of you. And it'll come up for you. We've been talking about this a lot lately. It's in your gut. Like, as you read these things and you start to get that clarity and build that picture, it just starts to become very obvious.
Being labeled a type 4 at the beginning, like I said, I did not resonate with that. I was not a drama queen. It just, it's not the way I played in the world. But as I learned about the subtypes, I did find that drama queen inside of me. I just didn't project it out. I held it more masochistically. I would just keep it internal. And so other people didn't see it, but it was there. And that comparison was there. And it was icky to look at. And it's helped me mold my life in a better direction because there is that vice or passion on the one side, my envy, but on the other side is the higher level, what you can become once you recognize it and start to act. It's like shadows, Carl Jung's shadows, those parts of yourself you don't see. So the other side of that for me, if I'm not envious, I'm equanimitous. Is that a word? Equanimity.
Yeah.
And so that means my emotions are balanced. I'm pretty open and centered, and I can take in lots of information. I'm not judging. People are allowed to be what they are, and I can actually go find people who are better at something than I am and get help instead of being envious that I'm not them, that I'm not good enough. And so the tool, although it's uncomfortable at the beginning, has huge growth potential. And this is where I'd like to shift gears now that we've done a little high level. You guys can dive into each either. This is what Dave and I do in our coaching. If people are into Myers-Briggs or they're into Enneagram, we help people explore it for themselves on how to make themselves better. Dave from the scaffolding, me from delight. We're just helping you unravel yourself.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun too, because once you get into these tools, there's so many layers, so many archetypes you can play with. Dave and I have discussions on different layers. Oh, that's my FI acting in superpower while this other part of my personality is not doing that. Oh, and here's my type 4 getting all envious from that thing. And then we can unravel it and we can make better decisions because it's conscious. We feel it arising out of us.
Yes, and I just want to throw in there, the way that she's talking about it is exactly how it happens when we're in those states. When we can really be honest with ourselves and be like, "Oh, like of course that's my FI or my TENI going and looping around or being crazy." Like, it creates space with what is going on in our lives and allows us the opportunity to make different choices. And that to me is just where the real power and the tools come. It's fun to have the extra stuff with it, the extra descriptions, what kind of career might be associated with what MBTI or how Enneagrams might go to the grocery store. Those are all fun. But where the power of these tools really come in is when you can allow them to create space in a moment where you need to make a choice and see how these attributes are showing up, how you want to respond. That's really the key. It's not, okay, I'm experiencing this situation, and because I'm a type 1, I'm responding this way. It's more, I'm experiencing this situation. This is my response. This is how I want to respond. This is what I want to do. Oh, wait, because I want to respond that way, that's a very type 1 preference. That's a very type 1 tendency, or that's very like PE way of handling that situation. Oh, okay, right, check. That's who I am. Got it. And so by doing that, it allows space to make it lighter and to have a little like self humor with it, which I think is important. It's good to create some lightness with it, and then that allows you to act and celebrate your humanity or choose a different way to cast that shadow. And that's where I think the power comes in with the coaching, is that we don't use these tools on this sort of superficial level. We really use them to dig into our personality and our choices, so that way we can open ourselves up to other possibilities.
Yeah, they're great tools. And almost any personality tool you could play with the way that we play with them. We use other tools. These tools are self reporting, but I've dove a little bit into astrology. And if you go deeper into that past the sun sign, there's all this different stuff, and you could play with those ideas. Or another one that I really enjoy is called gene keys, but neither astrology or gene keys are self reporting. They're based on your birth date and what time you were born. And I find that fun to play with as well, because that one just tells you this is where the stars aligned or whatever. And then your self reporting, when they start to overlap, it's crazy, especially if you do the self reporting first and then you go to gene keys and you put in the stuff and you're like, oh, that, oh, yeah. And they start to match up and you're like, oh, yeah, I see that. And hey, I self reported well because they line up and they have that energy. And it just builds this map of your personality that you can now pick and choose in different circumstances which part of yourself to bring out in that's going to be most useful in that instance. And I think the problem with these personality tools where we get ourselves into trouble is when we look at them and we build a wall and we say, that's who we are. Now the world needs to revolve around us. Everybody that comes in needs to treat me with kid gloves because I'm an introvert or I'm an INFJ. And so I'm just really empathetic and introverted and future thinking. And that's just me. And just let me be that. I'm not an extrovert. I can't extrovert. And that's not what it teaches. It teaches us how to use our personality to navigate the world in a really powerful way.
Right. And I think the misapplication of the tools is what creates the criticism. So when, just like you were saying, oh, I'm an introvert, so I have to behave this way. Not only are you limiting yourself through a very like one tool, one lens, but you're also ignoring all these other qualities that are a part of who you are. I think what occurs is that instead of looking at the tools as a box, as a brick wall that sort of solidifies who you are, look at it more as like a language. Like you're learning a new way of explaining your patterns of behavior. And so what happens then is, as you adapt and create this new language, you can then begin to shift how you show up, how you act, how you behave. And one of the reasons that I love the Enneagram is because it just doesn't stop with finding your number. There's lines, there's wings, there's all sorts of other components and attributes of it that build a way for you to become a wholer, healthier individual.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, Enneagram takes you spiritual if you want to go that way. So it starts with our personality and the way we act, whether we're type 1 or type 4. But Aranio Pius from CP Enneagram would say, we are not our personality. That's just the shell, it's our protective layer. And if we can get past that, we can get to our true selves. So the other side, that more mysticism, spiritual side, takes you from just generally being who you are to your more spiritual nature. So if you're interested in that, that's deep.
Well, and you sort of brought up another common phrase used on the personality hacker side that I think is relevant here as well, which is that these are maps, they're not the territory. And for me, at least, the way that I sort of cognitively think about this is that it shows me how to get to the destination. But once I'm there, I get to explore. Like I get to see and, and experience what's there, right? If I'm going to plan a trip to the mountains, I can even look on Google Maps and see a picture of the mountains, right? Because we have all this like advanced imagery. But until I get there, until I'm picking up a rock or until I'm actually seeing a worm crawling across the road or an elk in the lake or the river or whatever, I'm not in it. And it's getting in it and experiencing it and having that different level of awareness. That's what that quote means or brings up for me.
It's a huge shift when we go from, oh, here's the numbers, here's the letters, here's what they mean for everybody, to here's the numbers, here's the letters. Oh, here's how I show up in this circumstance. And actually living into that and seeing it and then being able to modify your behavior for your betterment, for your shadow casting. How do I cast differently? Instead of casting, for me personally, my envy out, I can cast out my equanimity. And that's powerful.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the other way that this really kind of my final thought is as you begin to learn about your types, your personality, you begin to see it begins to almost act as like a mirror, two-way 3D Doctor Who mirror, but it does because what ends up happening is you start to see a reflection of yourself with these tools, with these personalities. Then you begin to see a reflection of others, of your sort of personalities and tools in others. And then as you start to understand these types, you begin to see just how unique and individualistic everyone else is. And at least for me, the more that I begin to understand myself and how my wiring and brain works, the more curious and even empathetic I become of everyone else around me, the more compassion I have. And to me, this really ties back to our tagline of celebrating our humanity. You know, as individualistic as these tools might be, they're also a way to unify and sort of connect to the wider human experience and how other people are different. What's really become fun then is I see how other people think and operate and show up, and it gives me a way to communicate with them that I might not have otherwise had because I can communicate with them based on the tool or the personality or what's ever kind of showing up for them. And it gives me a way to communicate at a level that they feel seen and heard. And that's just a really great gift that I think you can give people in celebrating their humanity.
Yeah, there's just a ton that these tools give. And it's why we're always mentioning them because we learn something new about ourselves through these tools every time, especially for Dave and I, because we both have a deep knowledge of ourselves through these tools so we can interact using them and just play and bounce ideas off and have aha moments. And so it's harder by yourself, but it's really fun when you have a partner, as long as you're not trying to change the other person. That's the warning here. My last warning before we wrap this podcast up is don't use it to judge others. don't use it to fix others. Let them have their personality, and unless you're actually coaching them or they've asked, do not use it to tell somebody else how they need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Let them be who they are.
Exactly. And don't try to figure out their personality because it's much harder. I did this for years where I thought I knew people's personality, but it was based on behavior. And Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, it's internal. There are different reasons happening inside of us for why we do stuff. And the external outcome of that is not a good representation. So don't try to guess people's either.
So, for our audience listening, I have a question for you. Are you familiar with the MBTI, with Enneagram? Do you know your MBTI or Enneagram? Do you have criticism of these tools? What is your experience with these if you have experience with them? We always love hearing from you guys. And as always, make sure to like our podcast wherever you're listening. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Share us out to your friends and family. Drop us a comment. Let us know how you're doing. And until next time.
See ya.